Also, if you need a certificate of completion, please email Stacy at the end of today's session. Also, if you have questions, please type them in the chat box and I will relay them to our presenter as we go along. So with that, I will turn it over to Heidi Nusma.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. I think that was Kylie. My name is Heidi Nusma, and I'm a clinical social worker in the state of North Dakota, and I am employed at the University of Mary. I'm the chair of behavioral science there, and the programs that I oversee are almost all of the programs that we offer at the University of Mary having to do with behavioral science programs. So those are addiction counseling, criminal justice, psychology, social work, and we are also going to be starting a master's in social work online program, which will be our first graduate master's program at the University of Mary, and we hope to have that up and running over the next 2 years. So I work with a lot of our students, our faculty. I work with a lot of people in our community in the state of North Dakota with people who have experienced trauma. This past week, I was at a 2-day training in Williston over in the western part of the state, which was so beautiful. And we were educating people on human trafficking. And we were meeting with many survivors that have been labor trafficked and sex trafficked in our state of North Dakota. And so this follows along those same lines and that same type of training that we had over in Dickinson this past week. And so I'm really happy to be here to share with you just some basic knowledge on trauma-informed practice. And the reason that we're doing this is because the people that you are serving can really be vulnerable at any point in what we call the life cycle of a traumatic event. Because the consumers, the tenants, and even providers have limited knowledge. They have limited social skills sometimes, and some verbal skills. They really are some of the most vulnerable in our state, and they have been exposed to many types of abuse over their lifetime, and probably currently are still having some of that abuse. So with that, they would also be less likely to tell somebody about that abuse. So sometimes it's just helpful if we see what those symptoms are and those behaviors are as we're working with people. They are also likely more likely to display more trauma-related symptoms and behaviors, and their capacity to heal might really be limited depending on a disability that they may have or some past experiences that they've had in their life. And they can face immense stigma for telling people that they have been through these traumatic events, and even marginalized by society at large, and which may also be a part of the trauma in itself that they might be experiencing. And it can actually make that worse. Before I go to the next slides, Kylie, I see that there are some things in the chat. Is that something I need to know about, or can I go ahead and proceed?
You can continue.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, and I know I have this mark here, and I struggle with this part of Zoom, just letting y'all know I'm not the best at technology. My students are always much better, and they help me so much when it comes to technology. I'll try to keep that down there. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. We have less than an hour now to go through just a little piece of trauma and practices that I would hope that you can use. It is my goal to always give you some type of strategy along with the information that I'm presenting. And so I really hope that that is what we'll do today. So before I review the content of the presentation, could I have you put in the chat whether you have any knowledge having to go with trauma-informed practices with your current work that you're doing? And then Kylie, I'll just have you tell me kind of what we're seeing in the chat.
Okay.
So you can say, yes, I have some knowledge of what trauma is and what it looks like in the work that I do, or this is my first training in trauma. Whatever you want to put in there, that'll be helpful for me as a presenter to know how much depth to explain some of these concepts. Oh, thank you so much. It looks like we're getting some, Kylie.
Yep. So we do not have any training. I do not. It just a comment, I believe. It's so hard to see North Dakota nice have sex and labor problems here. Past overcomer of trauma. I have massive knowledge of trauma. I do have some knowledge.
Okay,
This is my first training. I
great.
deal with it every day. Some knowledge, lots of first trainings.
Great. Thank you so much. So what I want to point out is this is just a surface level introductory, just basic information on trauma practices and some strategy that you can use in your work environment with your coworkers, with the clients that you serve. But then also, I want to just take a moment to say, I don't know how many are on this Zoom today, but I know that just from the research that I've done, that there are many of us probably on this Zoom today that have also experienced trauma. And so if that's the case, if anything that we're talking about today is triggering to you, please reach out to your support person. Some 800 numbers that the state has. I do not have those on the end of my slide today, and I apologize for that. I should have done that, and I forgot to quickly add that on there. But reach out to your supervisor or your family members if this triggers anything in you that you need to have a conversation with anybody, because that can do that very easily, because we just never know when triggers are going to happen. So
Heidi, quick to interrupt you. If you could share your screen again, somebody accidentally hit their share screen and yours went away.
Oh, okay.
And also right now we have 81 participants on this call.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. We are going to talk about a framework and some of the research. So everybody uses terminology different. So when I talk about framework, what I really want to do is I want to provide you information so that when you're looking at something, you're able to put a different lens of how you see things. So we know what something might look like, but what I'm going to ask you to do is, after you have this education today, I want you to use it as framework, which means that, let's say you see something with your clients or you see something with your coworkers. What I want you to do is just almost imagine that your glasses, or if you have anything, that this is your knowledge here, and you put this on, and then you take another look, you re-look at what you just saw or what you just heard, and use the information that you're going to be trained on today, and see if that makes you see things differently. Sometimes when we use a different framework or we use a different lens, we see things a little differently, and then we do things a little differently. So we're going to talk a little bit about that framework, and we're going to talk about research that is it stands behind some of the stuff that I'm talking about today. We're going to talk about something that it's not new in the field of trauma, but it might be news to some of you. I'm going to use some acronyms, and this one is called ACEs, and it's ACE, and it's Adverse Childhood Experiences. And so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to show you a little bit of a video, and it's going to go through what I mean when I talk about ACEs and how that's connected to, I think many of you on this call today work with adults. And so all adults have experienced a childhood. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that may have happened in their childhood, which make them who they are today as adults. And there's research that goes behind this. And so we're going to talk a little bit about ACEs. And then we're going to talk about some responses and symptoms, some vulnerabilities, some assessment and treatment. And so out of the 80 some of you that are on here today, I'm not sure if some of you are maybe clinicians. I'm not sure if some of you are caseworkers. I'm not sure if some of you maybe assess people in a professional manner. Like, I'm a clinical social worker, clinical counselors, I'm psychologist, psychiatrist, anybody who can do a clinical assessment. But even if you're not one of those people who can do that or have that part of your job, you will maybe have known that somebody has had an assessment, or that you might be referring to an assessment. Whoops, sorry about that. And so it's important for us to talk about assessment and then treatment, and then we're going to give you some strategies. I'm going to give you some strategies today that you can hopefully just immediately implement as soon as we're off of this Zoom. So what is trauma-informed care? Let's just talk about some basic kind of ready. We're starting to put on that lens so we can see things a little differently. So trauma-informed care calls for a change in organizational culture. And so that is exactly what our hope is that as we're talking about trauma and how it affects the people that we serve with, it is going to really help if just you as an individual gains this knowledge. Did it happen again, Kylie?
Yes, I'm not sure. Dakota Center and Dickinson, that seems to be who keeps clicking the share screen button.
So it says this will stop other screen sharing. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'm kind of excited it wasn't me this time. It's
Yeah.
usually me. Okay. I clicked a button to get us back on. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay.
I can see your,
Okay.
I can see your slide.
So what I was saying is that it is really going to help if, as an individual participant, you take what you learned today and you start using that different lens and you start implementing some of these strategies and the knowledge that you've gained, hopefully what you've gained. But what is even going to create a larger impact is if the organizations that you're working in do the same thing on a policy level. And so that's what the Road to Trauma-Informed Care is all about. It calls for a change in organizational culture, where an emphasis is placed on understanding, respecting, and appropriately responding to the effects of trauma at all levels. So what this has done with me being able to be here, at first, they want to ensure somebody contacted me within your administration or within, somebody contacted me and said, will you give us a presentation on trauma-informed culture and care and practices, and what's that look like? So you already have that part of that aspect where they've reached out and said, we want more information for our employees, which is huge. Then there's the providing the introductory training to all staff, and that's what we're doing here today. Then when you go back to your organization, you can say, you know what, I think we need to do a better job when it comes to looking at our policies to see what we do when it comes to trauma with the people that we serve in the community that we live in. So then you would establish some internal trauma, an internal trauma team, or just somebody who's going to make that a priority. And then it includes providers and provides in planning and evaluation of services. If you're working with an organization that offers services, then you're going to be a part of this and you're going to say, how can we include this framework when we offer these services? And then you're going to address any potential re-traumatizing policies and procedures. You're going to look at some of your policies and procedures after we're done talking, and we're going to say, you know what, I didn't realize every time we require that a client does this, this could be really re-traumatizing somebody that has trauma. Is there any way we can adjust our policy? Is there any way we can make that a bit better for these people? And then, you know what? Some of you are going to be able to do this next part, and some of you may not. Conducting early and respectful trauma screening and assessment for all. You know, this may be formal or informal, okay? So it doesn't have to be a formal assessment. It can be informal as well. So trauma-informed care, it understands and considers the pervasive nature of that trauma and promotes environments of healing and recovery rather than practices and services that may inadvertently re-traumatize. So if we're all working on this together, we can really help decrease the impact of what our trauma survivors are going through. Oh dear. Okay. There we go. So how does the framework fit into supportive housing model? So when I was doing research for anybody who works with housing, there is actually a model that's already out there for you guys, and it's called a supportive housing model. So how does that fit into trauma practice? It's trauma-informed care. It emphasizes the importance of providing physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both consumers and providers, and it helps rebuild a sense of control and empowerment in survivors' lives. So you know that anybody who is receiving supportive services, over time, they do lose some aspects of control of what is happening in their life, right? There's paperwork to fill out, there's signature, there's things to sign, there's rules, there's regulations, there's policies, there's procedures. And so we want to emphasize the importance of how do we help rebuild that sense of control so that they know that they have some of that control back, because many of our survivors had lost any sense of control when they were going through trauma. So just emphasizing that, and then also recognizing that every survivor of trauma learns their own survival mechanisms. So not a one survivor that I worked with over this past week had similar survival mechanisms. It looked differently with each one of them. And so depending on their resilience, and that resilience is how quickly they can bounce back from situations and risk factors in their lives. So trauma-informed care, it magnifies the importance of providing trauma survivors a sense of that, again, I'm going to repeat it, that physical and psychological safety. So with housing, you guys are providing them many aspects of that physical safety. And even psychologically, you're helping along with that safety, and it guides the support. It really does guide that supportive housing movement that you guys are working so hard to attain for your clients. In addition, it provides the needs to understand when to explore the tenant's story and when not to delve into their trauma. Many of the survivors that I work with dealing with trauma, they have certain triggers where they are really scared. And so you guys might all be getting phone calls, having them say that they're hearing that somebody's getting hurt, somebody's trying to get in their door, all these different types of things. And so you will have to be trained enough to know whether to explore their story or not. And sometimes when we explore that, they may want us to go down and really talk about the trauma that they experienced. That probably isn't going to be the case for most of you on this call. Maybe just keeping them safe and giving them reassurance to let them know that there isn't somebody trying to get into their door, even though they may have a feeling that there is, without going through the specific aspects of their trauma. Recognize that certain spaces and behaviors may be unintentionally re-traumatizing for tenants. This is going to look different for every survivor that you work with. There may be a smell of cleaning supplies in the places where you're, maybe you show them an apartment and it is spick and span and it is so clean. They used Pine Sol, they used bleach. But if you walk in that apartment and all of a sudden you realize that their behavior started changing and their anxiety started building and they had to hurry and quickly get out of the building, and you're sitting there saying, oh my gosh, this is like the cleanest I've ever seen this apartment. What could possibly be wrong? Well, without you knowing it, maybe there was some abuse that happened having to do with bleach and cleaning supplies. I mean, we just never know, or color of a carpet, or the way the apartment is organized, or we just really don't know until we dig a little deeper. But so as well as know how to hold information a tenant shares without judgment. We hear things that are unthinkable, unimaginable. Maybe they've made some life choices, things that you may or may not agree with. And so holding that information without judgment is really important. The people that we serve are brilliant. They've made it in past circumstances that most of us could never withstand. And so to judge them for making it this far in their life, it would just be very sad if we would do that. So we can validate their experiences in a way that is very non-judgmental. In supportive housing, we learn to define various forms of trauma. We understand the biopsychosocial impacts on both the individual and the community. So that biological, that psychological, and that social impacts on both the individual and the community. and practice empathy building by learning to identify different behaviors of trauma responses. People respond to trauma differently. Very few people respond identical. There are some similarities at times, but we have to know that it's not always just substances that people go to when they have experienced trauma. That seems to be the one that's reported the most in media and on the news. But so supportive housing provides 3 areas in healing from trauma, creating a sense of safety. And that really is probably the biggest one where you guys are positively impacting the survivors of trauma. You are providing them a place where they can feel safe. And that's something that all of you can do that some of us can't do. And so you are helping create a sense of safety by, putting up those 4 walls and helping them find a place. And so I thank you for all of that work that you're doing. But then allowing for mourning and processing. It's not all roses. Healing is never easy. And taking steps towards reintegration into the community. Having those relationships with them, building that with them, that is all probably new to them, learning how to trust and learning to, get resources in the community when you don't trust people. So that's part of that reintegration into the community. And knowing that being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of somebody's mental health. If you don't feel safe, it is going to affect your mental health. And so you guys are really at the center of helping with our survivors in this way. There is a part of this model, it's called the harm reduction model. And so supportive housing was founded on the tenets of harm reduction. So centering services around the needs identified by the tenants and meeting them where they are at. So you meet people where they are at. Sometimes you meet them in an apartment where they're going to be evicted. You meet them in the hospitals. You meet them in the long-term care. You meet them in their homes that they're going to have to sell. You meet them on the street. You meet them wherever they are at. And it recognizes common coping strategies, including drug and alcohol dependence. We know that that is a common theme of many of our survivors of trauma. It could be a coping mechanism, but understanding that treating survival skills requires treatment of complex trauma. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. And then commonly used trauma-informed practices include, this is how we really interact with people on a daily basis. So in this training, I'm not going to go into motivational interviewing, or I'm not going to go into strength-based management, but motivational interviewing is really a way to communicate with somebody to help them meet their goal. And so I would definitely, if I were you, I am going to provide you with this PowerPoint within the next couple of days, but I would definitely write down motivational interviewing and just learn some of the simple steps and how to communicate with people to help with that harm reduction model, because it helps move people to help them meet their goals in a way that is it's very empathetic. It's very center-based. It's meeting them where they're at. You know that it's best if they get in this apartment, but if they're not willing to make that change yet, it has to be them that's willing to make that change. And so we have to meet them where they are. And motivational interviewing is just a technique of communication. And then strength-based case management, I would definitely write that down as well. It's a way that we work with people, and it's strength-based means we are going to look at the people that we're working with, whether it be our coworkers, whether it be our clients, anybody that we work with in a strength-based manner. If people would focus on these 2 different aspects of the harm reduction model, all of us would be much happier employees. I can tell you that, because we would know that it would just be a healthier environment in that we all work in. So I would look at that as well. Instead of looking at somebody's weaknesses all the time, we want to look at somebody's strengths and help use those strengths to help them meet their goals. And so motivational interviewing and strength-based management, those are some of the tools we'll use in the harm reduction model. So there are 6 guiding principles to using the trauma-informed approach, and these are not ones that I have researched and put together. This is actually based off of the National Center for Trauma Informed Care. It's NCTIC. And the CDC used part of their training, and this is on the CDC's website. They put this on their website because it is such a good model, that they were training people throughout the United States when emergencies would come up, whether it be hurricanes or COVID, whatever it was. And they were saying, these are the 6 principles that can guide us when we're working with trauma. And this will show up again a bit later in our presentation. And so I won't go through it in much detail because we've already talked a little bit about the safety. We all know that it's going to be hard to provide somebody safety if they don't trust us and if there isn't transparency. So safety, trustworthy and transparency, peer support. We all know that, I mean, if we look in our own lives, how many of us have done anything without the support of others? Very rarely will we have done we have gotten where we are in our life if we wouldn't have had support around us, whether it be your parents, your teachers, your friends, your significant other, a stranger, whoever it may be. So peer support is very important. Collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and then cultural, historical, and gender issues. We always want to make sure that we're taking cultural, historical, and gender issues into play here. So it's not accomplished through a single one of these circles. It requires constant attention, caring awareness, sensitivity, and possibly a cultural change at the organizational level. And I talked to you about that a little bit more. If you're willing to take some of this information and add it to your daily practice and your daily job, that's great. We can multiply it tenfold if we can get it to our organizations and have policies changed. So now we're going to transition. I talked to you a little bit about what trauma-informed practice is, but now we're going to find out how do we know what we are looking for on the topic of effects of trauma, and what will that look like with our coworkers? What will that look like with our survivors? And so I have a 5-minute video for you that I'm going to show you to help explain what ACEs are, and then after that we're going to break it down a little bit more. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and make sure this works. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to push play. And so we are going to go through this a little bit after this, but this will just give you a highlighted reel of what we're going to talk about, because I know that people learn from different ways.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems, and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation, and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Okay, so we're back. So I just want to reiterate a few things on that video, because we're going to go through it. I'm going to actually ask you to add up your own ACEs. So remember that ACEs are a tool, and that it's not a destiny, right? So ACEs are used as a tool to make changes in lives of people. And so as we go on here, I just want you to remember that just because you know somebody that you know might have a higher number of ACEs, or you yourself have a higher number of ACEs, it does not it's not the same and does not equate to destiny of what your outcome can be. Okay, so I just wanted to remind you of that. So let's dive a little bit more into ACEs and the types of trauma. So the ones I want to focus a little bit on all of them. So abuse, for those of you who this is your first training, abuse can be emotional, physical, or sexual. So when we're talking about somebody is emotionally abused, it's where a parent or an adult in your home ever swore at you, insulted you, or put you down. Then physical abuse is a parent or another adult in your home ever hit, beat, kicked, or physically hurt you. And then sexual abuse is an adult or person of at least 5 years old or ever touched you in a sexual way, or tried to make you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempted to have sex with you. And then we go down to the neglect. And so there are 2 types of emotional neglect. There is physical neglect, which is an adult in the household never or very seldom tried hard to make sure your basic needs were met. And then emotional, it's a parent or other adult in your household often swearing at you, insulting you, putting you down, humiliating you, or acting in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt. Then we go to some of the household challenges or household dysfunctions. That would be if a child would have seen intimate partner violence, where parents or adults in home ever slapped, hit, kicked, punched, or beat each other up, substance abuse in the household, a household member was a problem drinker or alcoholic or used street drugs or abused prescription medication, mental illness in the household, that would be a household member was depressed or mentally ill, or a household member attempted suicide, parental separation or divorce, parents were ever separated or divorced, and then also incarcerated household member, it means a household member went to prison. And then I think, I did that with the neglect already. And so those are some of the types of trauma that we talk about when we are trying to get an ACEs score. And those are the definitions for those. When we talk about the effects of trauma, remember what they said in that video. I quickly wrote it down again just because I forget some of the statistics. And it said, so at 4, you're already could possibly hit twice as likely to have heart disorders. Between 5 to 8, if you are 5 or higher, 8 times more likely to be an alcoholic. 6 or more of people in their studies died 20 years earlier. And so there are definitely long-term effects of trauma. Since I was working with human trafficking survivors, one of the statistics that just blew me away this last week, having to do with trauma when it comes to people who are trafficked sexually, once they become survivors, their life expectancy is 7 years. That is a very sad statistic. And so I can only imagine how high their ACEs score is in relation to the trauma that they experienced. So it's only meant as a guideline. And so now what I'm going to do, you guys, is I always tell my students, and they get a little frustrated with me when I say, I know you all want to be in the helping field, or I know you like with all of you adults here, I know that you are all at some point in the helping field. And so when it relates to self-care, or when it relates to helping somebody else, we have to make sure that we are in a good place to do that. And so I am going to ask you, if you want to participate in this, nobody is going to tell anybody their scores, but I just want you to really connect with the content today. And so I'm going to ask you just to take this little survey, and then you can come back to it later, or you can talk to somebody in your life with a support person. And you could say, maybe this is why you react to certain things, or this is maybe why some of your behavior is this way, or maybe you have some physical and mental health issues. Always reach out to somebody who can help support you in this. And remember, this is just a guide. For purposes today, I am going to respond no to all of these answers, but it'll give you a good idea of what this looks like. Okay, so this is the ACE quiz. So we're going to go ahead and start taking the quiz now. So if you would have a blank sheet of paper in front of you, it's just going to take us a few seconds here to do this. So I'm going to start the quiz. So before your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Please mark yes or no on a piece of paper. Question 2, before your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or even hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Please write down yes or no. Question 3, before your 18th birthday, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touched their body in a sexual way, or attempt and actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Write down yes or no. Before your 18th birthday, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Yes or no. Question 5, before your 18th birthday, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you, to take you to the doctor if you needed it? Yes or no? Before your 18th birthday, was a biological parent ever lost to you through divorce, abandonment, or other reason? Yes or no? Number 7, before your 18th birthday, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes often or very often kicked, beaten, hit, or fist with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few times, or threatened with a knife or a gun? Yes or no? 8, before your 18th birthday, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic, or used street drugs? Yes or no? Before your 18th birthday, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? Yes or no? 10 of 10, before your 18th birthday, did a household member go to prison? Yes or no? So I'm just going to repeat this. Your ACE score isn't a crystal ball. It's just meant as a guidance that tells you about one type of risk factor among many. It doesn't directly take into account your diet or genes, or whether you smoke or drink excessively, to name just a few of other major influences on health. Okay, let's see if I can get out of here. There we go. Okay, so now that you were able to take that, what ACE training tells us is that depending on what your score is, will depend upon whether you have issues in these areas, whether it is behaviorally an issue, or physical or mental health. And remember, this isn't destiny. But the other part that this toxic stress in our lives can do to us is that it can change the brain development. And so it doesn't really talk about that on this with ACEs and ACEs training. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add in just a little bit of information on what this trauma and how it affects our brain. So it can change the brain development and affect how the body responds to the stress. Here on this screen, you can see that ACEs, it's linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance misuse in adulthood. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about how stress and trauma affects the brain. And so anyway, I think I'm going to. Sometimes this just isn't helpful for me. Okay, and so what ends up happening when somebody has gone through trauma is that there are it affects your brain in a couple of ways. And I like this diagram because it puts, when you've gone through trauma, it puts us in this survival mode. And so there's a learning brain versus a survival brain. And so many of the people that you serve on a daily basis are constantly in this survival brain, I'll call it. And what it is, it feels like they're constantly in a survival mode because it feels a threat. So it wants you to pay attention to it. And as it stays on longer and longer, more effect it takes to turn it off. So just like I'm sure many of you are aware of what negative thinking is, right? If we're always negative thinking and thinking the worst is going to happen, and thinking, you know, not the strength-based case management, but if we would be always looking at weaknesses, and we'd always be looking at negativity, that's what this kind of is. The longer we stay in that brain, thinking that type of brain, that survival brain, the more we just think negative, and it starts to become a habit. And actually it starts changing the function of your brain, because people with trauma misperceive situation as stressful threats. So to you, going back to that apartment where it was just beautifully cleaned and smelled so fresh and so clean, right? They might misperceive that smell because they're in the survival brain. So they're thinking that that's a bad thing, that smell is there. And they are way too focused on looking out for threats to focus on learning. And so what our goal is when we're working with people who have been through trauma and have a higher ACE score, is that we want to help them use the learning brain, because the survival brain, they're hyper focused on those threats. They don't like ambiguity. They have a really hard time making decisions. They think in black and white. They feel panicked, obsessive, afraid, or getting things wrong. They don't feel calm. They're not open to learning. They don't like making mistakes. They don't like being picked on. They don't like to raise their hand, have doubt about the ability to learn. And they don't get jokes very well either. Sometimes they don't understand that. But then we want them, like I said, we want to have them to be in the learning brain, where someone is, they are open to new information, comfortable with ambiguity, and they feel calm, peaceful, excited to learn, curious, not afraid of making mistakes. So when you've had so much trauma, you spend a lot more of your time in that. And what we're going to do is, once you guys are trained and you're able to learn those strategies, when you're working with people, we are going to help people who have experienced trauma stay in their learning brain by helping them feel safe and supported. And so what we do can help clients and the people we serve stay in their learning brain. And that's where it's best to be. When people were young or in college, trauma, it impacts their school performance. Oftentimes they have a lower GPA, higher rate of school absences, increased dropout, more suspensions and expulsions, decreased reading ability, and it can impact our learning, and it can impair our learning. So what it looks like, it can look like there's some attention issues, some memory issues, cognition. So when you're working with clients and they're always forgetting things, or they don't remember that you said this, or that you don't remember that you did this, or it could really be tied back to maybe some of the traumatic experiences that they encountered. They have, if you're working with people and you notice that, you can get about 5 minutes of work in and then they have to go take a break, it's because they might not be able to focus very long. Organize, process information. If you're getting frustrated with every time you meet with somebody and you have to reorganize their paperwork, you have to find their social security numbers, you have to find their social security cards, you have to find their insurance cards, you have to find their bank records. And, last month you did the same thing for them. It could very well be tied that they are in that survival brain and that trauma has impaired their learning. Effective problem solving and or planning, and they can have overwhelming feelings of frustration and anxiety. These are just some normal responses to trauma. And I think this might be on another slide as well. But loss of control during an event, after the event, intrusion of material from an event, numbing, emotional constriction, intense efforts to control experiences that might elicit memories, dissociative splitting of an aspects of the experience. So they might break off different times within the experience, hypervigilance, enhanced startle responses and sleep disturbances, shattered sense of safety. There again, this is, I think, the 4th time in the presentation safety has come up. And then just really disruption of self-identity. Some more experiences here. Responses that continue to be problematic long after the event. So people that you're working with, their trauma may have occurred when they were children, and you're working with a 40, 60, 70. I've worked with some 80-year-olds who have experienced trauma, and they still have some sleep disturbances. They still have some emotional constriction. They still have some problems with their self-identity. And so, some of these symptoms do not go away. I'm going to bring up complex PTSD. So there's PTSD, and then there's complex PTSD. And so complex PTSD is early and prolonged exposure. So someone may have a traumatic event, but if someone continues to have trauma that's prolonged, they could then be diagnosed with complex PTSD. And this really does affect the brain. There's an overdevelopment of the hypothalamus and the limbic system, underdevelopment of the frontal lobe. Is there anybody who can put in the chat why it's important to have a developed frontal lobe? What happens in our frontal lobe? Why do we need that developed as adults? Kylie, did anybody know?
Decision making,
Yes.
control
Decision making.
impulses.
Mm-hmm. So how many of us have worked with people who have made poor decisions? So here what we're telling you, the research says that if you have complex PTSD and you had prolonged exposure to abuse and neglect, that frontal lobe is underdeveloped. Hypervigilance at the baseline, you might have some dissociative episodes under stress, aggressive behavior, or extreme avoidance and dysregulation when triggered. So trauma can take many forms. We talked a lot about the abuse, the neglect, but we're also seeing many of the people that we serve that are coming from other countries are having like natural disasters that they've lived through. And so we have the emotional, the physical, the sexual. And so the three on this side here, the national disasters on the right, the accidents, and the invasive medical procedures, we are finding out that many of the people that we serve that have disabilities have trauma responses from medical procedures. And so we have to keep that in mind with some of those people that we serve as well. Going back to the accidents, there for a while I was working with many people who had traumatic brain injuries from accidents that they had. And so they had the trauma from the accidents, plus they had TBIs. So it can take many forms. It's important that normal trauma responses may be attributed to the person's developmental disability or pre-existing mental illness. You know, and for most of us, it's not for us to determine where the response started from. It's just to recognize that it is a trauma response. People with developmental disabilities generally have some type of symptoms following trauma that anyone else would, such as sleep disturbance. All of those same things happen with people that have developmental disabilities. Trauma responses generally represent a change from a person's normal level of functioning. I'm looking at my time here, so I'm going a little further. I think we're going to skip over why assess trauma, but I'll keep it in the slides for you. I'll keep it in the slides that you're going to get. Let's see here. Anytime there is an assessment, they are looking at the trauma history, mental health symptoms and behavioral problems, the environment, and then just different characteristics of the trauma. Okay, so key trauma principles for employees. First of all, realize the impact of trauma. That's really what I'm hoping for you today. Recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma. Respond by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices, and then do what we can as individuals and as organizations to not re-traumatize somebody. And so on this slide, you have the 6 principles and the 4 key elements all in one slide. And so, and that's from the National SAMHSA organization. And so I really like that one, because even if you print this out, you cut that out and you keep that with you and put that in your toolbox, you will definitely, stay knowledgeable in this area. So I wanted to leave you with some strategies. So some strategies that we can help the people that we serve have to do with routines. We want to make sure that we're helping people have routines. We want to make sure we give people a voice and choice, increase support and encouragement, set clear and firm limits, recognize the root cause of the behavior, provide safe spaces, give simple and realistic answers, be aware that things in the classroom, in the community, in the apartment may cause a reaction, anticipate difficult times, timer or warning for transitions. Many of the people that we serve can't move as fast as our work schedule wants them to work. And so we have to be careful about transitions, and then behavior programs for some of the clients that you work with. So let me ask you this, and if you could put it in the chat, out of these strategies with the type of job that you have, which one could you start using either this afternoon or the rest of the week? Which one would be easy for you to start using with people who have had traumatic experiences? Has anybody responded, Kylie?
Yep. Voice and choice, increase support and encouragement, simple, realistic answers, providing a safe space. Another simple and realistic answers, voice and choice, increase support and encouragement, providing safe place, give simple and realistic answers.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Okay, so I'm gonna just I'll leave this part up for just a little bit longer. Let's see. No, I'll go to this. So I found this quote and I just thought that it was really important. So trauma-informed care shifts the conversation away from what is wrong with you to what happened to you to elicit this response. So really that is this lens or this framework that I want to encourage you to use when you're working with your coworkers, with your clients, or anybody that you serve in your community. We have like 3 minutes. Is there anything that I could do in the next 3 minutes to help provide you with a bit more education?
There was just a couple of comments. Somebody stated, my problem is that I get clients that are like me, horrible trauma in their lives, and then I have to tell them, I'm sorry, you have to wait and stay living in your car or mission, as I have a wait list. Having had horrible trauma since I was 7, not now. And most people go back to it because the agencies who help them don't have a policy for people in dangerous situations.
Mm-hmm.
Avoid saying, oh, just get over it, just don't dwell on it. That does not help.
Mm-hmm. What I would do right there with that one, it is so hard to meet people where they are at, especially if you know that you can't help them with their safety at that moment. But you can be clear and you can be concise and you can say, I don't have a place for you to go today. So if I can't help you with that, what is something that I can do for you right now? Are you okay? Just asking, are you okay? And then they might say, well, I'm cold. I'm hungry. I don't feel safe. Okay, besides getting you in an apartment in the, within the next 24 hours, what do you think will keep you safe that I can help you with? And then as far as working through your own trauma, that's why I always say, it's really important to work through some of those things so that you don't have those triggers and all of that. And if that does occur, go straight back to your support system and talk that through with either a supervisor or a mental health clinician. Okay.
And then somebody just asked if the link for the ACE score test be sent when we send an email for the training certificate.
No, I won't. I don't keep. No, that's just your score erases right away. It's just an online quiz. I don't see that.
Do all of these traumas have to take place in childhood, or do they still manifest or affect the same if they happened in adulthood?
So the research that is mostly done is on childhood adverse experiences. And so no, you can definitely have trauma occur as an adult, and there can be, but remember, as an adult, you can end up having outcomes that could possibly be similar, But the difference is that if you, in your childhood, we're talking about the brain as well. And we're talking about organs growing and developing and stuff like that. So hopefully if you had a good childhood, that you have a 0 ACE score. And if that trauma occurs in adulthood, you might have some resilience that you didn't have if you would have been a child.
And then maybe we can have another training on this, as it is a very complex topic.
It is a very complex topic, sure.
And then somebody was wondering if you have another webinar on adult trauma similar to this one, or if you do another training.
I don't right now. No, I create as people need, or as organizations need it.
I think that's all of them.
Well, thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time today. I know it's difficult on Zoom. I love walking back and forth. I'm such a presenter that I walk back and forth. So this is hard on me to sit still and communicate with you for an hour. So just, you know, if you guys have any further questions, please go ahead and give them to Kylie. And I am going to give you the PowerPoints too, so that you can have those links.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for taking time out to present. Again, thank you all for attending today's session. Be on the lookout for the link for the survey. Please provide any feedback and comments, questions that you may have. Next week on our schedule, we have the Great Plains Housing Authority presenting on inspections /inspire. So hopefully you guys all can attend that training. Again, if you have any questions, please email myself or Cheryl and we can get them to Heidi as well. Thank you again, and hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, Heidi.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody.